Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. I am Mike Coletta.
And I am Tyler Osby.
And today we're continuing our conversation about id Software, and we're using the book Masters of Doom.
It's a great book.
It is. David Kushner is the author.
Yeah, and it's not too expensive on Amazon. You pick it up, read along with us, have a good time.
Or you could not read along and just listen to these episodes, if that's what you want to do. The
That's
world's
true.
your oyster.
That's true.
So we do recommend the book, though. It's really great. But Tyler, we were going to talk Chapter 5. That's kind of where we're at right now. You want to talk about that?
Yes. So we're on some Chapter 5 here. So now the team was free from soft disk, kind of. They wanted to work on their next game. So they'd done Commander Keen, and they would continue to release some episodes for Commander Keen at this time. But they also wanted to do something different. They wanted to work on something a little more grown up. Now, we're going to take it back to the D&D a little bit here. Carmack had been a dungeon master for D&D for years, and we talked about this in other episodes. And the guys at the Lake House also played a lot of D&D, mostly because Carmack was an awesome DM. So I think it's important to recognize the amount of work and dedication that Carmack put into his D&D sessions, because he had a whole world built, and he hosted sessions in that world for years. So he had a backstory and a history. It grew and changed over time. He had a glossary of terms only used in that campaign, and just the glossary was 50 pages long. That's how detailed his world was. So he went really, really deep on that.
Yeah, man, I can't even imagine as being someone who's like DM'd D&D campaigns. That's so much work, you know?
Yeah. And
it's
to do
insane.
it for years.
For years. It's like, I feel like that his whole life is D&D, computer games, and martial arts. That's what his life is.
Yeah, that's it. And now it's launching rockets into space.
That's true. That's the second. That's
That's
fourth
the other
part.
part. Yeah.
But we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah. I don't know if the book ever gets there, because I don't think he started doing that till way later.
No. Yeah. It's like 2015 when he started launching rockets. We'll talk about that later, I guess.
We'll get there.
Like
We'll
an
get
update.
there. Yeah. So the book is quick to mention here that one of the characters in his D&D universe was named Quake. So that's probably some foreshadowing for what will come later. It also had a legendary sword called Daikatana. You may have heard that name before, too. We'll get back to that. Anyway, the whole point of talking about Carmack's D&D campaign is twofold here. It shows that Carmack has deep dedication to the things he loves and the worlds he builds, but also serves a very immediate function in that it was a world that the guys at id's Lake House could draw inspiration from. And they would do that for years, even after the main group broke up and went their separate ways. At some point, the group gained possession in the game of the D&D game they were playing. At some point,
that would be so great if it was out of the game. The next sentence.
At some point, the group gained possession of a book called The Demonicron. It held immense power for whoever possessed it. Oh man, I can't talk tonight. We'll come back to that.
The Demonicron, man.
The Demonicron is messing with me.
Talk. Yeah.
We'll come back to that because it'll be important to illustrating Carmack's dedication to heeding the rules of his made-up universe. So we'll talk a little bit about id and the name, where it came from. So you might think of the name id as being a reference to the part of the brain where your deepest, basest desires come from. And it kind of is, but more importantly, it was an initialism for in demand, which is kind of a play on the D&D group's name. They had named themselves Popular Demand. I kind of like that. So lots of things came from that D&D campaign that they played.
Wasn't that Ideas from the Deep was the name of their company, so they just also shortened it to id too.
Yeah,
that's like, and it's like so many connections to why they chose id.
yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, the Ideas from the Deep stuff fits in there as well. So by this point at the Lake House, or the guys from the Lake House, I don't know. Are they? We left the Lake House at the end of the last chapter, right? I'm trying to think of.
No, they're still at the Lake House.
We're still at the
right
Lake
now.
House. Okay.
Yeah. That's kind of, I think, talking
Spoilers.
where I'm. Yeah, spoiler territory, but that's okay. It's history. I don't think you can have. I have a hardcore opinion here. You ready for it?
Yeah.
You can't have spoilers for things that are historical.
That's a good.
Like if someone watches a documentary and says something about a war you didn't know about, and they say how it ends, it's like that. It's too bad. Like you should have listened in history class. You know, that's not. You can't spoil history.
I like that hot take. Yeah, can't spoil history. So at this point, they're rolling in money. Commander Keen was bringing in tens of thousands of dollars a month, which is way more than just pizza money. As the book says, it's computer money too. So they all got state-of-the-art PCs to do their development work on. We're talking 386 PCs, not 386 PCs. I mean PCs powered by Intel's 8386 processor.
What's crazy, though, is models 1 through 385 were just rubbish compared to this one.
Yeah, this one was the true next step. And the 386 was like top of the line in early 1991. That's where we're at right now, early 1991. So we're still a few years away from the first Pentium processor. We got to go through the 486 before we get to the Pentium. So even though they had left soft disk, kind of, they still had some obligations to fill, namely a new game every 2 months for the magazine. So this whole time, while Carmack is working on his next generation graphics engine, they're still making games for soft disk to send out. Now, I've never played any of these games, but I gotta wonder what the quality levels were of the games included in the soft disk magazine, because they weren't spending a lot of time on them, and they weren't their like main thing. Like, they were working on stuff for them, and they were only doing the soft disk stuff to fill like the obligation they had. That wasn't their first priority. I can't even imagine having new ideas for games that often, but maybe the bar was pretty low at that point. They could just churn new games out. It's not like they're making GTA 6 and 7 every 2 months, you know?
Yeah, they actually, so we're going to talk about it later, but surprisingly, they were actually really cool about like testing their technology on soft disk games.
Oh, so that's cool.
So there is a game that I'm going to talk about soon, coming up in this next chapter today, that they used some technology that Carmack created as like a prototype to what would become an even bigger game.
Oh, I'm excited to get there.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it. It might be something that we kind of like, it's like mentioned in like 2 paragraphs of the book, but I think it's really important to note that they did throw away soft disk later though. Like, it's going to seem like, oh, they're really nice to soft disk, and then I'm going to tell you something, you're like, that's really mean to soft disk. So stay tuned for like 20 minutes from now.
They're actually still making games for soft disk today. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
So that did allow them to experiment a little bit with different tones for their games. They made a game called Rescue Rover for soft disk, which was a little bit darker, had a little bit of darker humor edge to it. But id's next game, Dangerous Dave in the Haunted Mansion, was much, much darker in tone. It was really spooky, and Dangerous Dave used guns to shoot zombies and stuff. So we're starting to see a little bit of that darker stuff coming in our id games. And this really pumped Adrian up. Remember, Adrian Carmack, no relation to John Carmack, he was the one who wanted to do these darker things. He had all kinds of like notebooks filled with like just really gross drawings of stuff, because he had worked in that. He worked in a hospital, was it, where he saw a bunch of dead bodies?
Yeah, he was like a medical. Like, his job was like a medical assistant in an office where they would like photocopy pictures of like ill patients or injuries of patients, and so he would see some horrible things. We mentioned it, like he'd trade them at like with friends at school, like trading cards almost.
That's
I mean, hey, you know what? The 80s were weird, man. Okay, just the late 70s, early 80s, a weird time. So
yeah. Anyway, it made him like really into really dark and gross stuff. So he was stoked to do this Haunted Mansion game. He was sick of doing cutesy games like Commander Keen. So the team started to move in the direction of those darker games. Adrian developed some death animations for Dave in the newest game, which John Romero thought was awesome, because remember, Romero also loved doing gory stuff. He had his Melvin comics that were always kind of gross, right? There would like weird stuff happen in those. So he was all on board for the new direction that Adrian wanted to go in. But
dude, I have a hard tangent to go off of on this point that I'm going to put in my notes to remember for the end. But there is something I want to talk about after this.
Does it have to be after this? We can do it now.
Well, it kind of is related to an email we got that I'm going to read. So I'm going to wait until the email, and then I'll tell you about it.
Okay. All right. So soft disk didn't like this new direction they were going in, and so they actually had id redo the game. But the love of that never left our heroes, and so they'll be bringing that back at some point. I want to take a meta look at the book itself, because I think the book is just really organized well. It explains during all this that the experimentation with art styles, tones for the games, Carmack. So while they're experimenting on all those art styles and stuff, Carmack was experimenting himself and pushing his graphics engine in new ways. He was working in 3 dimensions now, which was pretty unheard of at the time at this point in the world of gaming. Like, there were some things that had players thinking in 3 dimensions, or even displaying like really rudimentary things in 3D, like Battlezone. Like, there was some stuff. It's not like it invented the 3rd dimension or anything like that. But true gaming in 3D really had yet to be perfected. And that's what Carmack was working on. At this point in time, computer power was really starting to pick up pretty heavily, and Carmack was able to use the new capabilities of his 386 to develop a 3D engine that would just knock the socks off of players.
All the socks, they're gone.
Yeah.
Where'd they go?
There's going to be some real smelly feet.
Disgusting.
So, the virtual reality and 3D experiences had been pursued for hundreds of years in various forms. The book lays out several like things that people tried to do for virtual reality like thousands of years ago and that I don't really think is necessary. But I think you guys all know how cool 3D gaming is. But Carmack wasn't really interested in crafting this master experience that made players feel like they were in the world or whatever. Like he wasn't trying to tell new stories or make people feel a certain way or whatever. He just saw a problem that he thought he was cool. And he thought he could solve it, and he just wanted to make a game that moved in 3D space. He kind of knew some 3D stuff. He had experimented a little bit in the 80s on the Apple II, but with the newest advances in technology, it was starting to look like computers might be able to do some of that rudimentary 3D work in a way that they could use in games. And that's such a stark contrast between the explorations of different art styles and like different tones and deeper meaning in games that Adrian and John Romero were working on. And Carmack was just like, how can I make a 3D game? Yeah, that sounds good. I'm just going to work on that. So he was like really focused on the problem. And he did it. He made a 3D engine. And basically what he did that was so different from what anybody else had tried and was kind of unheard of was instead of having the computer draw everything in the game world and then just show the player like what was drawn in the direction they were looking, he had the computer only draw what was directly in the view of the player. So only what you can see on the screen is what's getting calculated, which I guess is really difficult to do because I'm sure you have to calculate stuff that's happening elsewhere in order to be able to calculate stuff in the screen. So so that allowed him to get the computing cost down to something that was actually reasonable for a regular person to have. It was a bit of a breakthrough, and me sitting here as like a non-engineer programmer, like I'm kind of surprised nobody had thought of it before. It seems so basic, but maybe that's what makes it so genius, is that like it makes total sense to me, a layman, when it comes to like this engineering stuff. And I'm like, of course you should do it that way. And like, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but Carmack invented it, right? He came up with that idea. And so that's why it seems so basic, is because it's just in everything now. That's just how games work.
Yeah, and this is the one thing that kind of surprised me, and we're going to bring it up later on, this engine again, but we could talk about it now, is the reason it only drew what was in front of you and why that was such a big deal is because at the time you couldn't move vertically up and down, like your viewpoint, you know, like think about like Doom, Wolfenstein, these older games we're going to talk about eventually, you could only look straight ahead or side to side. So it made it so he didn't even draw a floor or a ceiling. Yeah. There was nothing at your feet. You're just a ball floating in space, and you see this small square in front of you, and that's all you see. And that's why it saves so much time. That's kind of how I visualized it, because I was like, I didn't really get it at first. And then when they said no ceiling or no floor, I'm like, oh, yeah, because you can't look up and down.
Yeah. Well, the games had a ceiling and a floor, but they had no textures on them or anything like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, but it's pretty crazy to think about that. So,
yeah. And this was like not the last time that he would do something crazy and like just reinvent how physics works for video games. He's crazy. But they made a game called Hover Tank, which was a fast action first-person shooter for the computer, according to the book, at least. There may have been other games that like technically met the criteria for first-person shooters, but Hover Tank was really in a league of its own. They kind of had invented an entire genre of gaming there. Of course, Adrian made the corpses of things that were killed super bloody. That was like kind of his deal. I can't remember if Hover Tank was a soft disk game. It seems like a game they must have made for soft disk, because I'd never heard of it before reading this book. I think so. I'm pretty sure it was a soft disk game, and because like they experimented with soft disk before they did shareware things. Yeah. So that sounds about right. That must be an example of what you were talking about, where you're kind of testing their new technology on games for soft disk, which I'm sure soft disk was like stoked about, right? Like we're getting the latest in technology from the guys literally inventing it. That's awesome. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, what you got in shareware is the stuff we remember, you know. Right. So, right. But yeah, I think it's cool that I think this like was a blessing and a curse, having this lawsuit where they had to essentially make games for soft disk every 2 months. And it's weird because I watched them load up some like video of not this one, but the one we're going to talk about later, and it looks like it's weird because it's like it says Gamer's Edge, you know, because that's the name of the magazine and everything. And from the team at Gamer's Edge, it has this like picture that's all cool and stuff. But you're like, if you were living at this time and no internet, right? But you had both these games, you'd have no idea they were made by the same people. Yeah. It's so strange. You could be playing Commander Keen and be like, this is great. And then you pop in and play Hover Tank and you're like, this is the same people? Like, you'd have no clue. Yeah, you just have no idea that that's how it was. That's crazy. Yeah, because I don't think these guys were individually credited
on their soft disk games.
Probably not, if I had to take a guess.
Yeah, I think it just said made by the Gamer's Edge team or whatever. So
Yeah. Speaking of Commander Keen, they were still making Commander Keen games at this time because they were just making tons of money. People loved Commander Keen. They were making some changes, like they added a stun gun so that concerned parents would feel a little bit better about the violence their kids were committing on these poor aliens. But they were still making Commander Keen games. But all the while, since the early Dangerous Dave days, Romero had been looking for ways to expand the business part of id. They had game making down. They could easily churn out games that would make them a bunch of money. But at a certain point in a business's lifespan, there needs to be some business people kind of taking control to run the boring parts and make sure that the company runs smoothly for everybody making the games. This is where we encounter a new character whom you may have heard of in video game history. His name was Mark Rain. The reason you may recognize him is because he is currently the vice president of Epic Games. So he's kind of a big deal. Currently. And it's awesome that id brought him on to be their president in 1991. He had development chops, of course. He could make games, but he was a shrewd businessman, and he was able to get deals with other companies to release id's game at retail. So he could put the games on the shelf at the store.
Which is huge.
Yeah. It was huge. So like you said earlier, at this point, they're still working out of the lake house in Shreveport. But the business was growing, the money was flowing, and it was time to find some new digs. And that's where we leave this chapter, with the group deciding that Madison, Wisconsin was the place for them to go. It was a nice college town, and best of all, it had seasons, which I guess Shreveport, Louisiana does not have seasons, much like Los Angeles.
I've been to Louisiana in the wintertime, and it definitely felt like summertime, so I could see that.
Yeah. Most of the group was pretty cool with leaving, but Adrian didn't really want to. He was from Shreveport. He loved it there. But after some convincing, he agreed to load his things up like the rest of id and head to the far north of the continental U.S. The book ends the chapter by pointing out that the computers they loaded in their cars for this road trip were their own. No more stealing soft disk company resources to moonlight making their own games. They were on their way to superstardom, I guess. I don't know what they're on their way to, but
I think superstardom's right.
Yeah,
that's a good way to do it.
Yeah. I like that. The computers that they left, the computers that they brought to the lake house were not theirs. They stole them, or they were borrowing them without permission. But the ones they left the lake house with were their own.
Yeah, and so they moved to Madison, Wisconsin, like Tyler just said. And initially, what's funny is they're all like amped about it. In fact, Romero and Tom go up there and check out Madison, or not Madison. It's not. It's no, it is Madison.
It's Madison.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, I think I have an error in here later where I say Appleton because there's said Appleton on the brain. But okay, so they're in Madison, right? And they go up there and they see it and they're like, "Oh, this is so great." Well, their expectations when they went up there, I think, were a little different than when they actually moved there. So the apartment they moved into was a big complex, right? And John Carmack agreed to live in the apartment that the rest of them use as an office because he didn't even care. At one point, they mentioned he didn't even have a mattress. He just had like a sleeping bag. And Romero had to buy him a mattress and be like, dude, you need to sleep on a mattress. But Tom, Jason, and John Romero were all across the parking lot in their own apartments. But Adrian, the one who was most apprehensive to move, was stuck in an apartment on the other side of the complex. So he actually had to drive to get to the office, which was kind of a bummer.
Wow.
It sounds like it was a big apartment complex. And so regardless of their new living situation, though, they did buckle down and begin work on the second Commander Keen trilogy that Tyler mentioned with the stun gun and making those changes. But meanwhile, John Carmack got back to his little side project of fast-paced 3D first-person games. So here's something I found important from the book. Like, John Carmack actually never really played games. Like, he played games as a kid, but once he gets started working on these like game engines, he doesn't really play them. Like, he plays with Romero in them, like Nintendo and stuff, but Romero was the one that plays everything and keeps his finger on the pulse of games. Like, because of this, like, Romero was the one that told Carmack actually about texture mapping. And if you don't know, is texture mapping is when you add a pattern to a tile of a wall. So say you just put a brick pattern on a whole wall, you know, and instead of it being one solid color. And that actually makes like it look a lot better, you know, because back then color, like just solid wall like colors was kind of boring, you know. And Romero actually learned this from Paul Neurath, who created Ultima Underworld at the time, and they were using texture mapping on 3D polygons. And then John Carmack, in classic John Carmack fashion, was like, oh, I can do that. And that's essentially what gave them the idea to make Catacomb 3D. And this is the game I mentioned from before. Catacomb 3D has you play as a wizard in a first-person perspective, and you shoot fireballs out of your hand, and it's like you like see your hand, and you see your hand like shoot the fireball, and you blow up enemies, and then you get keys to access rooms, a lot like another game we're going to talk about very soon that they made, like a red key and a green key and a blue key. But both this game, Catacomb 3D and Ultima Underworld, made waves when they came out. And Ultima Underworld essentially was a bigger game because it had the Ultima title on it. Like, what I'm learning from this history right now is we really need to do a history on Ultima, and we really need to do a history on Sierra Online, which is what we're going to talk about later too. So
okay,
yeah, because those are two big companies at this time that really like made waves and changed the game for everybody. But Scott Miller of Apogee really wanted the id guys to make something like this for his shareware. Like, he saw Catacomb 3D, he got a disc, and because this was a soft disk title, this is when they're trying out their software on soft disk. And he's like, you guys need to make a game for shareware because it's going to sell like crazy. So while they made games just fine on Appleton, though, the group was constantly starting to get on each other's nerves. So, no, this is where I say Appleton. Yeah, this is wrong. It's Madison. So Madison winners and Wisconsin winners in general do not mess around. I don't know if you've been to the winter. I'm from Alaska. Not. It's a lot like that. It's pretty rough. So Adrian's waterbed actually broke at this time, was another problem they had. Number 853 of why waterbeds are overrated and not fun. You think they're cool as a kid, and then you realize they're just terrible. And then John Carmack didn't own a mattress, and they were always like they at one point they tell a story in the book about how they wanted to go get pizza, and their car was like warming up, and then they drove to the pizza place, and they got out of the car, and it was so cold they just went back in the car and drove away and didn't even pick up the pizza. It was just too cold. Yeah. There was also trouble with Jason. Now, Jason, I don't know if I wrote his last name down here somewhere. It's Blokiak, I think, or Bloshiak. He is a person that worked at Softdisk and was a roommate, like the other roommate in the lake house with them, working at Softdisk in Shreveport. And he moved up with them because he kind of just wanted to change. But the problem was the gang kind of felt like he was the fifth wheel. Like, he never really fit in, because they all kind of had their own roles, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But instead of firing Jason outright, what they did is after Catacomb 3D, he just made their Softdisk games.
Like, so this became the Softdisk guy?
Yeah, essentially it was like Catacomb 3D, great technology. Okay, Jason, you got the next 2-month project. Well, we all work on this other stuff. So it sounds like they did do new experimentation with their Softdisk titles, but other times they also just gave it to Jason. Not saying Jason was a bad designer at all, because he was a pretty good designer, it sounds like, especially if he came to work with them. But that way they could just all work on the new shareware titles for the actual id company. So the roles of the team are also discussed in this chapter. It's for the 4 people minus Jason. So John Carmack is the technology lead, creating all of their engines for their new games. Tom Hall is the creative design lead. John Romero kind of floats between them and is like an idea man and kind of helps out with programming and design. He knows all of it. And then Adrian does the art. But it was also at this time that those roles were shook up a bit, because they brainstormed their new game and it was not kind of what was expected for some of them. So Tom actually threw out an idea for destroying mutated aliens in a lab and making it first person and really fast, and they're like, that's cool, but the aliens and mutation thing is kind of hack at this point. It's been used a lot. And then John Romero just threw out the idea to remake Castle Wolfenstein in 3D. And Castle Wolfenstein would fit really well for this, because the original Castle Wolfenstein is actually a top-down maze game made by Muse Software, and it was originally on Apple II. And it gave the effect like you were scrolling through these rooms, because you'd go through a maze of rooms and then go to the right side of the screen or down or left, and then it would move to a new room. So it kind of had this exploration aspect to it. And that's really what they liked for this fast-paced action, is now you're shooting Nazis, you're moving really quickly through each room. It's got a feeling to it. It just kind of works together. It's perfect to make a first-person game out of. And This is where there was a flip. So instead of Tom being the creative design lead on this, now Romero kind of took control of that. So now we actually have like Romero and Carmack working side by side. They are the two main design leads on this remake. The two Johns. And Tom was there to assist, not doing anything. Like he did some stuff. I'm going to tell you what he did for Wolfenstein specifically. But also it's important to note that Tom kind of did this thinking they would all just go back to Keen after this, you know?
Like this was just a detour away from their real moneymaker, which was Commander Keen games.
Yeah, and I think we're going to get more into that later on in some chapters. It's but important to think about now. And finally, also at this point, when they decided they wanted to do Castle Wolfenstein, they fired Jason.
Aww.
Poor Jason. Yeah. So for Christmas that year, John Carmack bought himself a brand new $11,000 Next computer. Or NEXT, I guess. I don't know how you're supposed to say that.
It's Next, yeah.
It's Next, sold by Apple. This was like the top of the line. It was like a stealthy black box looking computer.
They're so cool. Actually, they weren't sold by Apple. That was Steve Jobs' next company after he'd been kicked out of Apple in the 80s.
Oh, see? Well, there you go. I got it wrong. So it's sold by Steve Jobs. There you go.
They would later be bought by Apple, and then that's how Steve came back to Apple. But anyway, at this point in time, they were Next Computer. They were separate from Apple.
Yeah, so the Next computer is what John Carmack figured he needed to make Castle Wolfenstein.
They were beasts
in 3D. Yeah, so also here's some fun from the book, by the way. They list some names, some possible names of what Wolfenstein 3D could have been called. And I just want to read these. And apology for me butchering German at the end of this list. The Fourth Reich was one idea for a name. Deep in Germany. Castle Hasselhoff, which is amazing. Luger Me Now. That's pretty good. Okay, Dolktufel, which stands for Devil Dagger, or Geruchschlecht, which stands for Bad Smell.
Okay.
But yeah, they ended up actually going with Wolfenstein 3D because it turns out Muse Software went bankrupt in the mid-'80s and there was no one had licensed Castle Wolfenstein. So they could just call it Wolfenstein 3D. Scott Miller, by the way, meanwhile, in Apogee, loved this idea. And he was like, also like, by the way, we mentioned it last time too. He was correct about, he was like apprehensive about that retail store release that Mark set up for them. And it actually did end up hurting the sales of the second Keen trilogy. Not to say they didn't make money, because they still made money on the second Keen trilogy. That's definitely a thing. It just didn't make as much money. But with Wolfenstein 3D, Scott Miller guaranteed the id Software guys $100,000 at least.
All right.
Yeah, so they're getting into some real money now. The retail sales, though, of the Keen game actually were kind of lackluster, too. And this is kind of a fun thing to find out. The reason they think it was lackluster, like one of the reasons, is id blamed it on the box art, because the box art was done by the same person who does box art for Lipton Tea. And that's who they chose to do the box art for Commander Keen. And the team really didn't like it. But they actually did end up with like a deal with FormGen through Mark again on Wolfenstein 3D, even if FormGen claimed they didn't want to, quote, stir up the old World War II stuff, is what they said. They were apprehensive at first because of World War II stuff. Oh, if they only knew about, I don't know, 2003 to present.
Oh my gosh. The like early 2000s, like 2000 to like 2003 for World War II games was just unstoppable.
Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, Battlefield 1942.
Gosh.
It just never ends. So yeah, it's just really funny that they were apprehensive about World War II stuff in the early 90s and then what the world would become later on, like 10 years later.
Yeah.
So now FormGen is agreeing that they'll do the retail side of Wolfenstein 3D. Because that's one thing I noticed, even though these guys like didn't, they kind of goofed it with that retail sales, and it kind of did hurt the second Keen trilogy. They're just excited that their game is being sold on multiple platforms, and they're just going for it. You know, they don't care. They're like, we'll put it on everything. And Scott, while disappointed, didn't stop them. He really couldn't stop them. You know, it was just like, this is theirs. They own it.
Yep.
So the gang got to work. They knew two things about what they wanted for Wolfenstein 3D, and they knew it wanted to be brutal, and they wanted it to be fast. And that was what they really focused on, like gore and action and fast pace. So Carmack optimized his ray casting and texture mapping to make the game go really quickly. Like you're moving really quickly. Still only drawing what the players could see. So that means there's no visible floors or ceilings like directly above or below you, except when you're looking straight ahead, you see like the flat textures of the ceiling and the floor. Also, all the sprites were 2D. So this is kind of like a cardboard cutout is how it's described in the book, but they always face you, which is a common technique in those early first-person shooters. Adrian, for the art, scanned a bunch of images from World War II history books to get the SS officers and like also the weapons and then like the insignia correct on everything, which is pretty cool. Did some research. Actually went to a library probably.
That's great. Making strides in game realism here.
Yeah. Romero brainstormed other like cool new crazy gameplay ideas. Like he thought of the idea to have guard dogs that would fight you and like Gatling guns and have all this excessive gore. And it's kind of funny because like Tom's job was to work out collectibles. Like he's the one that made the treasure and those golden crosses you can find on the ground. But when they were thinking of like how to do health, they like brainstormed a bunch of stuff. Like they were like, we should do turkey dinners because why not? But then they also were like, what if you go over a body, and you just suck the life out of them? And they're like, that's an idea. They're just like weird brainstorming things. Also, they thought if you kill a dog, you could like eat the dog for health. It's weird.
Wow.
Yeah, it got really weird. One idea they liked initially, but was removed once they added it. Because it slows down gameplay, is in the original Wolfenstein, they like the idea of killing people and dragging their bodies around corners for some reason, like a kind of like a stealthy kind of deal, Oh,
like Metal Gear Solid, hiding a body in the locker?
Yeah. They wanted to do that, but then they realized it was like the antithesis of everything they wanted for Wolfenstein.
Because everything down.
Yeah, you're supposed to be going around shooting guys, and now you're like dragging a body around a corner. When it's like, no, who cares if they see you? You're going to shoot them anyway, One thing that we don't really talk about a lot in their early games because they never really did that much to it, but they started with Wolfenstein 3D, is sound and music. And for that, they got Bobby Prince, who was a game musician recommended by Scott Miller at Apogee, and he made the music and the sounds for the game. Like he had a really cool Gatling gun sound. It's all him. He did it.
Nice.
But one of the biggest changes, and I think this is really what made Wolfenstein 3D look so good for the time, is they switched from the 16 color palette EGA graphics to the 256 color VGA graphics.
That's so many more graphics.
Yeah, and so many more colors. Like it just opened the world for Adrian to like really put more detail into the modeling, and they talk about how he added more death animations for it and was able to like really make the game look so good for the time. So we're actually going to jump to another thing while this is all going on. In February 1992, Roberta Williams and her husband Ken, who are the founders of Sierra Online, received a package from John Romero, and it showed off Commander Keen in Goodbye Galaxy. And Roberta was impressed and actually requested a meeting with the young programmers. And this was kind of a big deal for the id guys because this is like meeting your direct heroes.
Yeah,
like Roberta,
she was a
Ken,
legend.
Yeah, they're like legends because they essentially helped make computer games from like $1 million industry to a $1 billion industry by the early 90s. Like the 80s and 90s was all Sierra Online making games better. And that's why I really want to do a history on them because they're a huge part of it. And we're going to talk more about it later. Keep on going, Mike. Here we go. Okay.
Can't wait.
I should mention that the id guys had been nonstop programming for like a month up to this point. And when they flew to California to go hang out with Roberta and Ken, they looked gross. Like I'm talking scraggly beards, long hair, lack of hygiene,
Like how we all are during COVID times.
Yeah, also like clothes with holes in them, like they just didn't really care about anything else but programming their game. And there's a moment in the book where Carmack, in classic John Carmack fashion, takes a tour of the Sierra Online office, and he talks to a young programmer for a bit, and he looks at what the programmer's doing, and then he like berates them for wasting time and that they're an amateur in programming. And he's like, John Carmack's kind of a jerk when it comes to computer programming. That's what I'm learning.
He's very good, and he knows it, and he needs to make sure that you know it too.
Yeah, and like Romero like goes like, way to get him, man. Like it's like really a weird moment in the book where it's like these guys just really
boom,
like
roasted.
Super confident. Yeah, exactly. It was like a boom roasted moment. But the boys, so they end up going to a fancy dinner with Ken, and they tell him how much money they make on shareware, and Ken just can't believe it. like they're making like $30,000 on shareware a month. It's mind blowing. And then they let Ken play the demo for Wolfenstein 3D. And at the end of the demo, it says id Software, part of the Sierra family? ? And then Ken says, do you mind removing the question mark? And offers them $2.5 million
Whoa.
to be a part of Sierra Online. And so the gang's like pretty blown away. This is like their heroes. So they go back to Madison and they want to talk about it. And then they decide to treat it a lot like they did with Scott Miller. So they asked for money up front to like show seriousness. And so they asked Ken if they could get $100,000 at signing. And Ken completely balked at this. And the deal was completely off.
Wow.
And they're kind of disappointed. Obviously, this is their heroes, you know, Roberta and Ken Williams. They Sierra Online. This is crazy that we're even talking to them. But Romero, in classically Romero fashion, had the idea kind of, well, you know what? We don't need you anyway. Like, we could do it ourselves. We've been doing it ourselves the whole time. And it's at this moment in the book that they do something really cool. Like, Tyler talked about it before. But one thing that, like, the book uses as a narrative device up to this point is that weekly Dungeons and Dragons game that they play all the time. And the story goes that Romero in this Dungeons and Dragons game up to this point, like right around the Sierra Online times, had a powerful book that we mentioned, the Demonicron. Okay. And so Carmack is trying to find ways to get this book out of Romero's hands because it just makes him like super OP in the game. At one point, he even asked Jay if he can fly up to Madison to come help like play and bring his character back. And Jay can't. Like, he just like, I can't do that right now. So what John Carmack does is he like plays the devil and offers Romero like the Daikatana, the most powerful weapon in the game, if he gives him the Demonicron. Okay. And so Romero takes the deal and the devil gets the Demonicron and then Romero gets the Daikatana and then the devil destroys the entire world and just lets all the demons in. And Carmack just goes, well, that's it. It's over. You guys lost. And then Romero's like, there's nothing we could do. He's like, nope, that's it. The world's covered in demons. It's dead. The end. And he just ends his D&D game that he'd been doing since his childhood.
Decades-long D&D world. He just poofed it out right in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, and that's like, and that kind of shows like what's going on in they're like a phase of their life is ending in this time, and like they're getting away from this D&D game that John Carmack's been doing for his years, and they're also like the deal is over with Sierra Online, and it's just kind of really cool that the book weaves this in and out like that. And I think that's why people should really read this book, because it's not just like we kind of focus more on the video games. They do go a lot on they go on side tangents. Like whenever they talk about video game violence, they'll do like a bunch of paragraphs on that. And there's been some other stuff that we've kind of glossed over because we've covered it in our previous episodes, honestly, is the answer to most of those questions, which kind of feels good for us. You know, they talk about early video gaming and they were like, we can skip this entire part of this chapter because we covered this in our first episodes. But if you want to know more about that and also catch more of this narrative stuff like this, I think you should definitely check out this book because it's really good. So that was my side narrative note. But with all this blowing up in their faces right now, I mean, they lost the Sierra Online deal. They're living in Appleton. They're not liking it. Their kind of tensions are rising between members of the group.
They lost their D&D world.
Lost the D&D world, you know, it's terrible. That's probably the worst, if you ask me. Enter Kevin Cloud. So Kevin Cloud was the editorial director at Softdisk and was also the informal liaison between Alva Covius and the id Software gang after they split up in a weird way. And Kevin was always kind of on their side, which was cool. Like, he's one of the few Softdisk employees who didn't hate the Johns, you know? And he was like fun and a jokester, but he could also flip and be like a diplomat and a hard worker and help them out. And they're like, we need Kevin Cloud to come up here and help us with like this more like business side of things, you know? And so he agreed because he kind of wanted to leave Softdisk anyway. And so him and his wife left Shreveport and headed up to Wisconsin. And this is kind of funny because the way it goes is this. So Kevin Cloud knocks on the door at the apartment after driving 19 hours. John Romero opens the door in his underwear and is like, it's too early. Come back in like 3 hours. And so then the guys leave. Kevin and his wife leave to go get coffee. They come back and they talk to him and he's like, cool, well, I'm going to sign a lease like tomorrow, I think. So I'm looking at apartment stay and sign a lease tomorrow. And they're like, great. That's great to have you with us. We're super excited. And so Kevin and his wife leave and they go do their own thing. After that conversation, they're kind of like, as in the gang, id Software is like, we're done with Madison. Like, I'm over it. We're all over it.
It's too cold here.
Exactly. It's too cold. And they're like, we have money. We can go find a place that's warm. Where do we want to go? And they straight up pulled up a map of the United States and the world. And they were like thinking of all these new, warmer places for id Software. So they actually talk about Jamaica for a bit as being a place they could go. But then they remember Dallas, Texas. So there's two reasons they wanted to go to Dallas, Texas. First, it was hot and warm. And the second is because Scott Miller and Apogee were based in Dallas, Texas. And it just makes sense to they all be in the same city. But Kevin already agreed to sign a lease tomorrow morning. So at 3:00 in the morning, John Romero and John Carmack, they all start calling Kevin's hotel room just over and over again and leave a bunch of messages asking him not to sign a lease. And so Kevin woke up the next, at 5 a.m., a couple hours later, and saw these messages and was freaking out because he thought he was getting fired. Like, he's like, oh no, they can't afford me, And so then he finally gets a hold of them and they're like, no, we're going to Dallas. The whole party's moving to Dallas. We're out of here. And then he's like, oh, okay. And so he just agrees to change his whole life plan and move to Dallas with the team.
Jeez.
So the chapter actually ends with them getting a moving truck pulling up to their apartment in Madison, Wisconsin. And when they open the moving truck that's supposed to be empty, there is a Pac-Man arcade machine inside.
Wow.
And that's like what all of them grew up on. And it's a really fun moment in the book because the moving truck driver just like, oh yeah, that someone left it in there and I'm just going to keep it. And then John Carmack's like, what do you want for it? We'll buy it off you. But he just looks at these guys who are all like, again, unkempt, unshaven, long hair, ratty clothes, and goes, $150 is fine. And then John Carmack just pulls a wad of cash out of his pocket and pays it to the guy and buys it on the spot. And then they leave Madison, Wisconsin. And that's what we're going to talk about next time in The Gang Goes to Texas is what I'm going to call it. Yeah. So it's really getting fun though. I feel like it's kind of picking up right now, and we're kind of like moving along with them through id, and so I'm super excited to see where we goes next.
Yeah.
But we have emails to read.
We got some emails to read. You want me to read one of these emails? Do you have?
You want to read Steve's email?
Yeah, I'll read Steve's email. So Steve says, right. What's up, guys? Listening to you talk about id Software has revitalized my love for FPS games I grew up with, and it got me to start replaying one of my all-time favorites while my newborn is asleep, Fear. That stands for First Encounter Assault Recon.
You beat me to it. It's such a good game.
Was wondering if you had any experience with these games or would do an episode on them. I would also suggest to play Fear 3. In my opinion, it's a very fun experience since each player gets a different character that has different playstyles. Second player gets the better character, in my opinion. Also, getting caught up, hearing you guys mention Quake so much really makes me wish they had made a Switch release for it. And he signs this, Steve Areno. So that's your name now, Steve Areno. If you message us again, that's what we're calling you, Steve Areno.
Yeah, it's going to stick. Man, I love Fear. Yeah. I played the first Fear when I built a computer. It was so fun. That's
Me
like
too.
It's so scary. The spooky lady and the air ducts. Oh,
yeah, spooky lady in the air ducts. I remember vividly. I remember Fear being. So when did that come out? Like 2005, 2006.
I want to say 05.
Yeah, so this was like early high school for me, and I had just finished building my first real gaming rig because all the other computers that I had put together were like sort of cobbled together from maybe I got my parents to buy me like a cheap, like super cheap graphics card from like the secondhand computer store, and like I cobbled it together with other old computer parts that I was able to like scrounge up, But in my early high school years, I was finally able to buy all the parts to build my own gaming PC, and that was one of the first games I played on it because it was brand new, and it was like shortly after the Xbox 360 had come out, and that sort of signified the start of a new gaming generation, And so Fear was like the first next generation game that I felt like I was playing on my super awesome gaming computer. It was very, very cool.
Dude,
graphics were great. The slowdown thing is neat. It's awesome. Yeah.
We have the exact same experience because that was me too. Like I had built my computer in like, I want to say 04, like late 04. And I had played like Oblivion on it, I talked about before, but Fear was the title I remember being like, wow, I am like, this computer is so powerful, even though it's not. Like, mine was very middle of the road, but Fear makes it look good. And it was so scary too. And I don't play scary games that often, but I never played Fear 2 and I never played Fear 3, so I should definitely check them out.
Me
based
either.
on Steve Areno's advice.
Yeah. I never played those either because I realized that like these sorts of scary games weren't really for me. But I did really enjoy the first Fear.
I think they get more action-y after the first one is what I've like heard through the grapevine. But what's funny about Steve Areno's suggestion is I think I wrote Fear on this list really early for episode ideas because it was something I played as a kid. But then I thought, oh, that's too like, close, like personal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and so there's another game I talked about, General Chaos, on the Discord that I played with my brother for Sega Genesis, and I wanted to do a history on that. And then I realized, one, there's just not a lot of history there, and two, it was really personal. But if Steve Areno wants a Fear episode, this might go up in the list of priorities here.
I'm surprised they never did a remake of Fear. I'm looking at the Wikipedia, and I'm like, they ended it on Fear 3, it looks like. That's it. No remake, nothing.
Fear 3 kind of fizzled out, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, though. It got good reviews, it looks like. It had like B+, 7.75, 7.5 higher. So, I wonder what happened with because Day One Studios made it. Did they make the first Fear? I don't even know. Nope, looks different. So maybe it was one of those series that just kind of fizzled out, which means that was 2011. It's ready. It's primed and ready.
It's time. It's been almost a decade. Yeah,
I feel like Fear also kind of was cool because in a lot of modern horror games, like I'm talking, what's the one where you go into the Outlast? Yeah, the creepy insane asylum and stuff. It's a lot of like you don't have a weapon, and you're just like wandering through, and it makes you really scary. But for guys like me who get scared during video games, I kind of want to be holding a machine gun, and that's what Fear did for me. It really helped me out.
You got scared, you had something to shoot.
I'm like, at least I can shoot my gun, even if it doesn't hurt the ghost. It feels right,
Yeah.
Because that's what would happen is I would like walk in the air ducts, I'd see the lady, I'd scream, and then I'd just click the left like mouse button and just fire all my gun, and it wouldn't do anything to her. All right, we got another email. It goes, hey, Mike and Tyler, I am loving the id Software talk and can't help but think this would be a great movie or TV series with the amount of shenanigans these guys get into. I agree with you. This would be a great like HBO limited series of the Start and
Yeah,
Skid.
I would watch that.
Also, is John Carmack secretly a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, eats only pizza, and does martial arts? Has to be some sort of connection there. I agree. I completely agree. And speaking of TV series, have you guys had a chance to check out the new Netflix TV series High Score? Finished episode 1 and have to say it's highly entertaining, but they did forget the importance of pinball to video games. Maybe you guys should call Netflix up and let them know that the first few episodes of your guys' podcast is a great prequel to the series and also explain the importance of Jaybird and John Glames. Have a good day and look forward to your next episode. So this is actually what I wanted to talk about from my side tangent a long time ago. I have been watching High Score. I've watched the first 4.5 episodes. I'm in the middle of episode 5, which is on Street Fighter. But episode 3 is about early RPG games, and they talk a lot about Roberta and Ken from Sierra Online, but also Richard Garriott, who designed Ultima Online. And I recommend everyone watch episode 3 of this TV show. See how weird and quirky Richard Garriott is, and then you can go down a YouTube rabbit hole of all the weird things this guy collects. Like Richard Garriott feels like if they gave 10-year-old me millions of dollars. Like that's what it feels like. His mansions have like secret rooms and doorways. He has like swords and crossbows all over the walls and like shrunken heads and like automatons. It's really weird, but it's so great. Like the series is great too. You should watch it. But I was like thinking we really need to do an episode on Ultima and on Sierra Online. They also do a really cool thing where they show how Roberta Williams designed the first game for Sierra Online and how she storyboarded it all out using like kind of like Twine, which is like a interactive narrative tool that people write stuff on with like bubbles and they move from bubble to bubble. She essentially did that on paper. And that's how she designed the first game, which is like a murder mystery in a house.
Dang.
It's so cool. Yeah, this show is great, and I'm on the Street Fighter episode, and then the last episode is actually on id Software.
Oh, I haven't checked the show out at all. It sounds like I need to put it on my list.
It's pretty cool. It's going to cover a lot of things we've already covered, but there's also a bunch of stuff. I mean, we haven't even touched fighting games yet, and that's something we definitely need to do coming up soon. But I know you and I both don't have a lot of experience with them.
Yeah.
So, but we can learn stuff. It'll be fun.
Yep.
All right. Well, that was Chris, I think is the name. I hope I'm okay with them saying that. It's just an email, and I'm not going to read their email, but it says Chris in part of it. So I think that was Chris. So thank you, Chris, for the email. Appreciate it. Also, Steve Areno. Thank you. We got one review to read, and I'm going to read that, and then we're going to call it. You ready?
Yeah.
This is 5 stars from Seaman the Ogre. I love it. I have binged this podcast from episode 1 starting 3 weeks ago and love it so much. I love that there is a podcast about video games that isn't just the history and has fun side tangents. Thank you, Seaman the Ogre. Also, I like that the hosts go off script and share their sources. I have one game series I want you to do. You have talked about on your podcast, but we would love a full history of Batman games. Oh, that would be good.
That's
love
a great
the pod. Batman is awesome. Bye. And there's
great suggestion.
PS, could you also do a history of Battle Royale games and a history of gaming on calculators? Oh, we mentioned that at one point, I think. I love the graphing calculators. Thanks. Bye for real this time. And that's from Seaman the Ogre. Yeah, those are all 3 really good topics. Battle Royale is interesting because I don't think I got to watch like a genre become created or actually realize I'm watching the creation of a genre until now. Like MMORPGs happened when I was a kid. They started before me with like mushes and stuff. But we really got to watch like the Battle Royale thing. And now that Fall Down, is it Fall Down Guys? That game that's like everyone's
Fall
crazy
Guys?
about? Fall Guys. Yeah, we should definitely, that's kind of cool to do. History of Battle Royale games. And that's also cool because that was also started from the modding community.
Yeah, there was I'm sure it goes back further than this, but there were lots of like Hunger Games mods for Minecraft that really kind of kickstarted it, I think.
Yeah, and there was also Arma 3 had a mod too that was really big. And that kind of, Arma 3 had a mod and that made PUBG. And then PUBG made like Fortnite and Apex. And I remember at the time, there were talks where they would do a Halo Battle Royale, and then 343 shut that down so fast, and I'm like really glad they did because that would just mean they're getting on the gimmick train. But yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for the review. If you want to leave a review, you can do that wherever you listen. If you don't have the ability to do that, like they won't let you review, just tell your friends about it. That'd be nice to do too, or send us an email at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. I am on Twitter at mecoletta, MECOLETTA. Tyler's on Twitter at SneakerElf, ELPH. And then, and the Discord. We have a Discord that you can join, and it is attached. It's pinned to my Twitter profile if you want to click on that. Or you can just email us, and they'll send you a link. It's not a big deal.
And you don't have to have a Twitter account to check a Twitter profile. You just go to his Twitter profile, it'll show up whether or not you have an account. Yeah,
that's true. You can just search me, and I'm pretty public on there, I think. So it shouldn't be a problem. But that's all for. I think next week we're gonna dive into some more of this book because I'm just loving it. It's like kind of becoming a fun, just thing, to just keep up. I'm reading the chapter, and then I get to read them again for the notes, and I kind of catch a lot of stuff too, which is neat. So
yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for listening. And do you want to say bye to everybody, Tyler?
Yeah, goodbye, everybody.